Hi, everybody. I am Jill Zima Borski, back to talk about sea level rise. I'm a 27-year journalist in the Florida Keys, and we are the canary in the coal mine for sea level rise. And today I have with me a resident of a Key Largo neighborhood, Stillwright Point, which is experiencing sea level rise. And so we're going to find out the history of this area. And I want to point out for those who aren't familiar with the Keys that the Keys are about 112 miles long. Key Largo is at the quote northernmost end of the Keys versus Key West at the southernmost point. And we're about 112 miles long. So the neighborhood we're talking about is at mile marker 105.5 Bayside, in other words, on the Florida Bayside versus the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm introducing Emily Caldwell Stewart, who has chronicled the flooding in her neighborhood. And we want to talk about how it's affecting the people of Key Largo. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
Why don't you introduce yourself, telling everybody about how long you've lived in your neighborhood and some of the problems and specifically what that picture behind you shows.
Thanks so much, Jill. I was actually down here as a child. My parents were here, built their home in the 1950s, which is, I have to make clear, not the house that I have now. And I loved it down here as a child. So when I had the opportunity as an adult to come back here, I did in 1995 and bought my own home. And Stillwright Point is a development that was created totally of fill from when they dug out Adams Cut that connects the bodies of water on the bayside to the ocean side. And this was a total fill area. So we've experienced not only the sea level rise, but that the ground has settled or sunken to a certain extent. When I bought in 1995, there were none of these issues whatsoever. And most of the flooding, I think the first actual flooding that we had that was not hurricane related, we have to realize that when a hurricane comes, every place is flooding, even dry lots, will experience a storm surge and that. So that's a different anomaly. But when we experienced the king tide flooding and that, the onset for us was around 2008, 2009 was when we first started experiencing it, and has gotten progressively worse in the years from 2015 to 2020.
And I want to mention what king tides are. Apparently, it's just a reference to where the sun and the moon are in the sky, and particularly relate to new and full moons, and the whole sea level rises during these quote king tides. And is it especially in spring, or can it be throughout the year?
It's mostly in fall. The onset is usually around Labor Day.
Okay.
And the ending of it is usually around the first week of December. That's roughly it.
Okay.
And there can be others that'll occur. I think once we had it in January where we were flooded for like 2 days.
Okay.
But it's not the onset like we saw in 2019, where we literally flooded from, I think it was like August 29th, and our last flooding was in early December, that we were 94 days flooded.
And that got a lot of publicity, even on national TV news and channels. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you experienced and what your neighbors experienced?
Well, during that time, like initially you think, oh, this is just going to be a few days, but it drug on and on and on and on. And yeah, we had everybody from New York Times to CNN to international. We had France 2 television come, because this is such the anomaly. And people make the mistake of thinking, oh, this is, like a rain event or something like that. I don't think it rained but twice during those 94 days. It was totally a king tide flooding. And part of the problem is we're not just a few inches at some streets experience up to 18 inches of this saltwater intrusion during this time. And that brings up the other point that this isn't fresh water, this is salt water. Some vehicles are unable to make it because they're too low to drive through it. But if you choose to, as my expression, sacrifice a vehicle because it truly is sacrificing it to drive it through salt water, that's in your future.
And about how many residents are affected by the flooding in Stillwright Point?
We are 215 houses. Some are vacation ones and some are full-time. It's a probably 50-50.
And how did you get around during the worst of the flooding?
I purchased in off and on all my life, I've had Jeeps, but in 2015, I specifically purchased a Jeep to be able to come and go. That flooding would no longer be an issue for me, other than it adds, if you want to try to preserve your vehicle as much as possible from the salt water, every time that you choose to go out and you return, you spend up to half hour, 40 minutes washing down the underneath in the wheel wells and all that. But that still isn't the end all to protect it.
You know, that's interesting because people who live up north understand,
Sure,
you know,
salt.
yeah, the salting of the roads and what that does to their vehicles, and they see that firsthand with the rusting and that kind of thing if they're
Yeah.
not able to spray their vehicles down. Now, also, it seems that your neighbors had to make do one way or another to get to work. Say, express some of those stories that you are aware of.
Well, not everyone did, I guess I'd say, did what I did or could do what I did. But one of the neighbors who has an accounting business put on boots and walked through the floodwaters every day, the approximate from his house, about 3/4 of a mile, and had carrying his suit in a garment bag and had one of his employees pick him up every morning. And this was for 90 some days.
Exactly. It's
And then we have
unheard of.
and then we have the problem with some of the elderly residents who are in here, the homeowners, that one of them has a visiting nurse or visiting helper come every day. And she was having to park her vehicle and walk the 3/4 of a mile
Mm.
to the elderly woman's home to be able to help her. But that's only one part of it. There was no way to get the elderly homeowner to doctor appointments for 90 some days.
It's amazing the level of inconvenience that your neighborhood experienced. And tell about the gentleman that was used to his schedule of going out to eat every day and how he coped during 94 days of flooding.
Yeah, we actually had somewhat of an issue that one of the elderly gentlemen who was in here doesn't cook. He gets his meals every day at a local restaurant, and he has a really tiny Honda, and it was unable to make it through the flood water. So one of the neighbors had checked on him at day 10 or day 11 and found out that in that entire time he hadn't eaten. And you shake your head. There's all sorts of things like this. We had another resident who was on chemotherapy,
Mm.
and they had to manage. And I think a neighbor had brought a truck and brought him to where they had parked their car closer to US 1 out of the flood water. So
And
this was
again,
just another, I don't even, it's more than an inconvenience, another step to have any sort of a daily normal life.
exactly. And so that's why we want to do these series of interviews.
Mhm.
This neighborhood is an example of what could come to several neighborhoods throughout the Keys. And talk about like the worst years, I guess, was that about 2019, although this started way back in 2008, 2009?
Yeah, probably the true onset worst for a long amount of time, and it was pure king tide, was in 2015. We were flooded for 22 days. And it was interesting because I guess I'd say, it was new.
Yeah.
And at that point, I didn't have a Jeep. And I was wading through the floodwater and, like to do anything. Fortunately, we have a grocery store at the end of the street. But, you're limited as to how much you can schlep back to your house when you're carrying everything by hand, and I was doing that like a couple of times a week. But if I wanted to go do any kind of an activity, like with my Rotary or anything like that, I was having to have, like people pick me up. So there was no semblance of normalcy for 22 days. And then, like we roll around, like I got a Jeep a year later, and then I had some semblance of normalcy with the flooding. And I thought, 22 days was an anomaly and it'll never be this bad again. And then comes 2019. And 2019 was was the 94 straight days of flooding.
Mm.
And nothing compares to that. And then that was when we actually found out that while our streets are flooded, the sheriff's department no longer patrols our neighborhood. They will respond to an emergency in here, but they will not do regular patrols. So that was like another unpleasant aspect. And we had a problem mosquito wise. It was just absolutely horrible to be outside. We were so inundated with mosquitoes. And mosquito control would not send a vehicle in here because they wouldn't drive it through floodwaters, because obviously the salt water will ruin their vehicle. And this was in the time that Key Largo was experiencing dengue. And I forget how many cases they had at that time. There was like 16 or so cases. And they were literally within half mile of Stillwright Point. But I think nobody collected specimens to see if dengue was in Stillwright Point, because obviously they can't get in here with vehicles and that. So it's sort of a domino effect that where it becomes no longer just an inconvenience, but it becomes, a health issue all the way down the line. And then 2020, we had 74 days of flooding. And again, like all the same things, but I don't remember dengue being an issue in 2020 because, everybody was COVID, and it probably wasn't as impactful on us that year because people weren't going out and doing activities. People were staying home. And probably the only inconvenience then was Instacart drivers refused to deliver in the floodwaters. And it trickles down, and you think that's trivial, but not when you have like somewhat of an older population in here who is dependent upon that.
Exactly. So now what is the county doing, since Key Largo is part of our Monroe County? What is the county doing to help solve this problem?
For us, I mean, obviously we're on top of it, like staying informed, attending the meetings and all that. And they've been doing literally study after study after study. And it was interesting because in 2015, they were doing, I think it was, and I might be wrong on this, I want to say an 18-month study, a 14-month study, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2019, our county administrator was asked on camera by ABC News about the study that was being done, and was told, oh yes, we're in the middle of I want to say 22-month study at that time.
Okay.
So now we've figured out that the 2015 study must have run at least like 4 years.
Oh dear.
or whatever, it was kind of a joke because we're like, okay, what study is this? So now where we currently are is we have applied, the county has for Stillwright Point for grant money about sea level rise to do the engineering plans and we'll use the term loosely, raise the roads, because it's much more complicated than that. But they've applied for the grant and they've won the grant from the state. And I want to say it's 1.7 million that we have won to do the engineering plans. And the grant money will be awarded this July 2022 to go forward from there. But the engineering plans will take up to 2 years to complete. Then at that time, they get submitted to the state, and we go through the whole grant process yet again, hoping, because we are considered shovel ready, that we look like an optimum sea level rise project for the state to give funds.
I have
go ahead.
I have a note here that the county, right, the Stillwright Point flood mitigation project in the design engineering phase is expected to cost, I think this is what you said, 2.37 million.
Yeah.
And the requested amount from the state is 50% or 1.18 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah, that's what. So then the county has to come up with the rest of it, and but what we're looking at until we get any kind of actual physical relief that the residents will know, we're looking currently at best scenario at 2025, 2026.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So it's not a happy, like it's not happy for us. And the sad part for us really is when we first approached our county commissioner in 2012, the response from our Upper Keys County commissioner was, people who build in swamps, what do you expect? And then when we went back to her in 2015, she actually laughed in our faces and said, her comment was, if it was me, I would just roll up my pants. Sorry, I would just take off my high-heeled shoes, roll up my
Oh,
pants, and I would walk.
so that's, yes, that's disappointing, isn't it, to hear
Yeah,
when your experience this on a daily basis. But
sure.
now at least there is design and construction being planned. I guess it
Yes,
consists of like a stormwater collection system, pump station, and disposal injection wells.
yes.
Uh,
Sort of like the sewer treatment system that we went through when we did the central sewer system. It's very similar to that.
okay, very good. And at least there's good news in that the Twin Lakes subdivision, a couple miles from you all, just received a massive grant from the
Yes,
feds.
yes.
So hopefully money is coming your way. Uh, is there anything that any advice you can give to other residents of the Keys in terms of how best to have your voices heard on this topic?
If you're not involved in the Keys, and not just in this, in anything, if you're not on top of it, you will see things happen that you're not happy with. Or if you really want action, you must stay on top of it. During the fall, when we're actually flooded, there's a handful of us in Stillwright Point who work on this unofficially, and we're at meetings, we're at webinars, we are, like totally vocal and involved. We're getting media, actually press releases out and sending photos and videos for what's going on in our neighborhood. And it's it's a full-time job on top of, like basically for a lot of people having a job already,
Right.
but it's a second full-time job. It's extremely time consuming.
Another thing I want to point out is, especially with the photo behind you, both edges of or no, only one side of that road is houses, right? We're
Yes,
on
correct.
North Blackwater.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but for part of the way, yeah. But
but
where the most flooding is, correct, yes.
where most flooding is. And the good news is we already have native vegetation on the other side, the
Yes,
mangroves.
correct.
So, I want people to understand that nature alone isn't able to take care of the problem because the mangroves are basically undisturbed and they
Yeah,
are
correct.
overwhelmed as well.
Yeah. And that where that photo in my background was taken, that's actually like the deepest point or one of the deepest points. That's the 18 inches deep.
Okay. Okay.
And to me, that's just, there's some photos that I have taken that at sunrise with the sun coming up, and they're very pretty, and it looks like you're on a canal with like the reflection of the sun, and how pretty this is. And then all of a sudden, it's a street sign.
Exactly. And that we're actually supposed to pass down that with our
Yeah,
vehicles. Um,
yeah.
and um, I wanted to ask about um, a neighborhood association. Is there such, and are they doing something related to this?
We have a homeowners group that has existed since for forever, but they're more a social group than they
Okay.
are active with this.
Yeah.
They
So,
would, I think that just comes down to that they don't have the time,
mhm, mhm.
and maybe it's a little bit better that it's a handful who work on it, because then we're not having, like to have lengthy discussions with all of it, and then we give to them multiple times a year a synopsis of what's currently happening.
So, yeah, there is a small group of activists within the
Yeah,
neighborhood that have really concentrated on this and taken it
correct,
on.
correct.
Well, I want to give you one last opportunity to mention anything you would like to about the needs of the neighborhood, or the fact that y'all bought at a time when this was unheard of and can't be blamed for buying your homes in a beautiful neighborhood that you thought you'd be able to live in the rest of your life.
Yeah, and this will actually be coming. I mean, in my opinion, and from what the county projections are, as far as sea level rise for the next like 45 years, the whole county is going to experience it. We're just at the beginning of it in Stillwright Point. We're the first development or whatever that is experiencing it to this degree. it's coming. It's coming for the rest of the Keys. There's no question about it. And I mean, Key West is very lucky in that they've been on it and they've had a pump system. I forget how many years, I did know that, but they've had a pump system and it's still not the end all because Duval Street still floods. They have times where Front Street and Duval Street is flooded, and it's not from rain, it's not from a hurricane, it is from king tides.
Yeah, that's
So,
fascinating.
it's not the end all, but it would be great if there's, like some relief for residents with doing this. But the county, in my opinion, waited too long to be, and they had the opportunity to be proactive, but instead they have been reactive. So it has cost us as residents with what we're going through every fall, but it's going to cost the county more and more money the more they have delayed because costs of everything have risen.
And it's interesting because our Monroe County is ahead of several other counties.
Yeah,
So
for
in
sure.
terms of our nation being behind as far as dealing with sea level rise,
Yeah,
it is eye-opening to think of Monroe County being among the forefront of
yes.
counties and their progress within the state of Florida, and yet it's still a little too late, as we're seeing in Stillwright Point.
Yeah, sure. Our state representative, Carlos Jimenez, had come out here to see the flooding for himself. And his first comment when he got out of his truck was, he goes, "This is much worse than Miami Beach." He said, "This is the worst I have experienced." And that was in Stillwright Point in 2020.
And that awareness has enabled him to bring home money to the Florida
Sure.
Keys that is
Yes.
going to help with this problem. So that was great that he came down to see for himself
Yes.
what this really looks like.
Yes.
Boots on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, unless you've actually been here during the flooding, you have zero grasp of it.
Exactly. Well, Emily is going to share with us some of her videos and photos through the years that we will intermingle in this video. So I want to thank her so much for her efforts on behalf of her neighborhood, and in fact, then the whole Florida Keys, because as you mentioned, this could be all of us in the future. And thank goodness I swim, but maybe a few more of us will will want to be good swimmers. And I only say that as a sad, sad joke. All right. Thank you, Emily Stewart, for your time today.
Thanks, Jill.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.